Hey, what's up, Push Kids? We're back for another lecture on U.S. history. What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at the trade networks that were going on, especially between Europe and North America during the colonial period. Our essential question for today is Learning Objective 2D, explain the causes and effects of transatlantic trade over time. Our first key idea, which is a little lengthy, I'll read it for you, says an Atlantic economy developed in which goods, as well as enslaved African and American Indians, were exchanged between Europe, Africa, and the Americas through extensive trade networks. European colonial economies focused on acquiring, producing, and exporting commodities that were valued in Europe and gaining new sources of labor. Let's kind of jump into this here. So the first thing we want to understand is that the American colonies were an important part of this transatlantic trade network. And all that means is that it's an important part of the network of trade that went across or trans the Atlantic Ocean. And they had a particular role to play. The colony's role in this trade network was producing profitable raw materials. For instance, tobacco from the Chesapeake region, or wheat from the middle colonies, fish from New England, whale oil from New England, indigo and rice from places like South Carolina were all important raw materials that were manufactured, produced, and then sold to England from the colonies. And then the other part of this is going to be what Britain's going to do. Britain's going to sell manufactured goods back to the colonists. Clothing, tea, guns, tableware, basically all sorts of manufactured goods. And so this back and forth was an important part of this transatlantic trade network. We can kind of see what's all being produced where. We see tobacco was by far the leading colonial export, followed by wheat and New England fish, whale oil, rice, and indigo are all important early commodities by the 1700s from the colonies. Now, part of this transatlantic trade network is also the increased demand for African slaves. As colonial raw materials, the demand for them is going to increase. The demand for slaves will increase as well. And so more and more slaves will be brought over from Africa, first coming to the West Indies, and then traveling northward to places like Charleston and to the Chesapeake. In its entirety, this network is going to create a series of triangular trades that's going to happen from America, Europe, and Africa. And typically what we're going to see happen is that manufactured goods will travel from Great Britain to be sold in Africa, where it's going to be exchanged for slaves. Slaves will be brought to the West Indies, where they'll be sold oftentimes for sugar and molasses, which will then be brought to the New World, where in the North American colonies that will be turned into rum. That rum will then be sold back to Africa or over to Great Britain, along with other products which will then be exchanged for manufactured goods back to the New World. But that brings us then to our second key idea, and that is how Great Britain is going to regulate this entire trade network. Now, generally speaking, the British government increasingly attempted to incorporate its North American colonies into a coherent, hierarchical, and imperial structure in order to pursue mercantilistic economic aims. But conflicts with colonists and American Indians led to erratic enforcement of these imperial policies. So look, generally speaking, by the 1650s, Britain had embraced this economic policy of what we call mercantilism. Now, mercantilism is the concept that colonies exist for the sole purpose of generating wealth for the mother country. And it does so by creating a favorable balance of trade, where a nation exports in value more than it imports in value. But this system only works if the trade is regulated. If the trade isn't regulated, mercantilism does not work as well. Therefore, the British will attempt to start to regulate their mercantilistic aims. And so what they're going to do is they're going to pass a series of laws to try and regulate and control this colonial trade. And the first of these is going to be the Navigation Acts. Now, initially passed in 1660, they'll pass several different versions of the Navigation Acts over time. And they're all designed to restrict the colonial trade and increase British wealth. You can see a list of some of the different parts of the Navigation Acts, such as no country could trade with the colonies unless it was shipped on either colonial or English ships. This allowed them to be able to then tax these items. The colonies could export certain products only to England. They couldn't export it to, let's say, England's bitter enemy France, or to Russia, or to Spain, or somebody else. But essentially, the biggest thing here is the Navigation Acts require the colonists to trade only with Britain. Now, the colonists started to become really good at avoiding the Navigation Acts. They smuggled a lot. The colonists were very good. In fact, one of the best colonial smugglers would be a guy named John Hancock, who you may remember his giant signature at the bottom of the Declaration of Independence. And so because of this and because of other issues, the Navigation Acts were only erratically enforced. They weren't enforced consistently. It wasn't worth it really to the British to do so, for the most part, at least at this time. Well, that ends our lecture for today. Pretty short one for today. So big ideas is that we have this economic system that's been set up that connects the colonies with Africa and with England, where we have this trade of raw materials for finished products, this mercantilistic system, and that the British are going to attempt to enforce this mercantilistic system with laws such as the Navigation Acts, though they won't always enforce them consistently. Until next time, go pack.